In this Network Instruments training video, I'm going to discuss the GigaStor active and passive instances. I'll also cover the GigaStor capture and packet capture and when you should use each, as well as some GigaStor best practices. If you have not already watched the What is a Probe Instance video, please watch that video before viewing this one. I cover more basic concepts of probes and probe instances in that video and assume you already understand what a probe instance is. What does a GigaStor instance do? Well, you already know that a probe instance is the monitoring software on the probe hardware that captures data. The GigaStor is a special probe that has a large disk array in it to store at least 2 terabytes of data and usually many more. The GigaStor's purpose is to capture traffic it sees and write that data to disk so that it can be retrieved and analyzed. The GigaStor is extremely fast and efficient at capturing network traffic, but this requires 2 unique probe instances, the active probe instance and the passive probe instance. In nearly every GigaStor is a Gen 2 capture card that you see here. Every Gen 2 card has a virtual adapter that includes all physical ports on the Gen 2 card. For this tutorial, I'm going to leave the default virtual adapter in place. To learn more about virtual adapters and when you may want to use them, see the virtual adapters tutorial video on our website. The active probe instance captures traffic and writes it to the RAID array. The active instance binds to the virtual adapter and writes all of the data from all of the physical ports in the virtual adapter. The active instance should have as large of a RAM buffer as possible to cushion between the network throughput rate and the array write rate. Passive probe instances, by comparison, mine data from the disk array that the active instance has already captured and written. It is the ideal troubleshooting tool in the GigaStor. It can also capture traffic, but does so to RAM, like a regular probe instance. Passive probe instances should also be bound to the slowest network adapter. I'll explain the reason for both of these shortly. To create an active probe instance, select a probe instance, right-click, and choose Administer Selected Probe. Click the GigaStor Instances tab. You can see that I have one active instance and several passive instances underneath it. All of the passive instances only can see what the active instance has written and captured. Select the active probe instance on your GigaStor. Choose Capture, GigaStor Capture Analysis. This opens the GigaStor control panel. There are 4 buttons here that are important: Start, Stop, Settings, and Analyze. For now, let's look at the Settings button. Click the Schedule tab. Here you can set when the active probe instance should run, we recommend that it always runs, and to set how the network traffic is captured. You have 2 choices, Packet Capture and GigaStor. For the active probe instance, always choose GigaStor. But when should you choose GigaStor and when should you choose the packet capture? Let me talk for a moment about the differences between these 2 options because they greatly affect your GigaStor. The packet capture option is just like on a non-GigaStor probe. It captures the traffic to RAM. Only passive instances should use this option. The GigaStor option captures the network traffic, writes the data to the RAID array, and indexes the information for faster retrieval. All active probe instances must use this option. A word of caution: do not choose to write passive data to disk on the GigaStor. If you choose to use packet capture on the GigaStor, ensure you are only capturing to RAM and never writing to the disk. If you need to write to disk on the GigaStor, use the active instance to write the data and a passive instance to read it. I'm now on an observer analyzer that is remote from the GigaStor. Just like with the active instance on the GigaStor, you see Start, Stop, Settings, and Analyze buttons. Notice the Start and Stop buttons are disabled. This is because this is a passive probe instance whose active instance is already running and writing the data to the RAID. You can select a time frame to analyze data by choosing the slider bars above the time graphs or by moving the selected window on the graph itself, and then click Analyze. I'm going to cancel out of here though. With passive probe instance on the GigaStor, you can also start a packet capture. If you need to do some spot troubleshooting on your GigaStor, start a packet capture by choosing Capture, Packet Capture. This should only be done sporadically and for short-term troubleshooting. Remember, this will be duplicating the information captured by the active instance. For longer-term analysis, you should use your passive probe instance to mine the data from the RAID array. When reading data from the GigaStor, you want to use passive instances, not the active instance. By using passive instances, you allow the active instance to do only one task, that is, write the data to the RAID array. If you click Settings and then the Schedule tab, you can see that you can schedule when a packet capture runs. But because this is a passive instance doing packet capture, you cannot define whether the capture is a GigaStor capture or a packet capture. Even though your passive probe instance is on the GigaStor, when you chose capture packet capture, you indicated that you did not need the GigaStor indexing functionality. But again, only active instances should use the GigaStor option. You should always bind your passive instances to the slowest NIC. To ensure the active instance can continue to write its data quickly, you should bind all passive instances that you will use for mining data to a non-Gen 2 network card. It can even be a non-existent card. Doing this means the Gen 2 card won't be sending a copy of its data to multiple places. It's the sending of duplicate bits of data that slows the Gen 2 card and the active instance. Select a probe instance and right-click. Choose Administer Selected Probe and log in. Click the GigaStor Instances tab. Select an instance and click Edit Instance. You can see that there are two network cards here. There's a LAN card and a Gen 2 adapter. I don't want my passive probe instance connected to the Gen 2 card, so I'll select the LAN card and then click OK. Here are some tips about the GigaStor probe instances. Only one active probe instance per GigaStor. If you have more than one virtual adapter, you must have one active instance per virtual adapter. Set scheduling to always for the active probe instance so that it is constantly capturing and writing data, and ensure that you chose the GigaStor option. Use a passive probe instances to mine the data that the active probe instance has already written. Do not pre-filter the active probe instance's capture unless you know exactly what you want to capture. If you have a filter and something occurs outside of the bounds of the filter, then the active probe instance won't see it and won't write that information to the RAID. Do not allow remote users access to the active probe instance. Ensure they have access to the passive probe instances only. If you have any questions about the information covered in this tutorial, contact Network Instruments Support or visit www.networkinstruments.com/support.